When the sinners find us, we won't hide. They'll come loud and they'll come fast. But we shoot first and we can last. Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. So we'll take a stand, 'cause we must protect our land. Keep your rifle by your side. They'll come day and they'll come night. They'll have our children in their sights. But if they don't have faith, their eyes are blind. They can scream and they can shout, but they can never smoke us out. Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When we hear the voice, we know we have no other choice. Keep your rifle by your side. They'll have bombs and they'll have tanks, 'cause they've got money in their banks. But we won't fall as long as we can fight. They'll go on to preach their hate, but they won't get past the gate. Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When I see your face, I know I must protect my place. I'll keep my rifle by my side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When I see your face, I know I must protect my place. I'll keep my rifle by my side. Keep my rifle by my side. Keep your rifle by your side.
Hello. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, good to be back.
Yeah, some technical difficulties tonight.
Yeah.
It's but it's good to be back, and
Yep.
I'm excited. I'm excited because I feel like this episode, I've said it before, things starting to come together. I really think this is taking it to another level tonight. Like what starts to come together.
You're right.
So, but yeah, how are you? You all right? You're gonna have
tease us a little bit. Give us a little bit of a preview.
Okay, before I do,
we
just some housekeeping. I do not have a phone, so I'm not able to monitor chat on my phone or video or sound. So I'll need you to do that. When inevitably, I've restarted it, but when inevitably the screen doesn't. Yeah, I'll need you to tell me. But what I think tonight shows is...
Go to the first slide, by the way.
Yeah.
And shout out to Renegade, who is our A student for attending every class so far.
And it's not showing up, is it?
I can see your mouse.
There we go. Is that up?
There we go. Yep. It's up.
Cool. So, incidentally, if I'm a little bit more talkative tonight, I know I can be a bit quiet on these. That's a joke. That's a joke, Jeff. Bueller?
Yeah.
That's
me, right?
Yeah.
Right sometimes.
Well, I might talk even more tonight because I'm drinking some some mead that was given to me by a friend of somebody that I did a favor for. So I highly
Can you say who or no?
As a friend of Survive the Jives, I'm happy to say that. So yeah, that's nice, and maybe hopefully making a little bit of a connection there, but we'll see. So yeah, but what we're gonna see tonight is it coming up? I don't feel like it's coming up.
Yeah, there's going to be a bit of a delay if you're watching it on YouTube.
I'm watching it on OBS, and OBS isn't changing.
Oh, okay.
So, okay. What?
Yeah, Bucklander lecture series.
Okay, good. Now I'll go back and forth because I didn't know what it was. What tonight will show is the foundations of the modern, what Quigley calls the pluralist economy, which is what we're living in, and the emergence and why we have the massive amounts of government spending, and why we have the military-industrial complex. And all those three things are very closely related. But we're going to go back, and I know what you're thinking. It might be like, wait, we're going to talk about interwar economics again? I don't know why he does it this way, but there's always something new in every chapter, but he does sort of jump around weirdly. But yeah, so I mean, I guess to be precise, what previous areas of Quigley are dealing with is specifically finance. And I'm going to turn myself down because I'm going into the red on OBS. Or unless you think I sound all right. So
It's better to rely on that OBS meter.
okay. So what you get? Can Renegade just say if that's too quiet or not? And you can relay that to me, Jeff.
Yeah, just keep going. There's a bit of a delay.
Right. So what previous chapters have dealt with is finance, financial controls. This is more broadly economics, and to distinguish, there's a difference between what banks do, that's like finance, and what the economy overall is doing, which is economics. So that's what we're talking about tonight, and we're going to take a look at 4 countries: Britain, Germany, France, America, and we're going to look at then how the systems shift from financial capitalism to monopoly capitalism. And then at the end, we'll look at what that actually did to economics in the 20th century, the actual changing economic factors. And then at the end, briefly, we'll look at what the pluralist economy is, which is, spoiler, it's everything. The pluralist economy is the best parts of the most efficient parts of laissez-faire, fascism, and communism. So we don't live in the free market anymore, right? Like, the free market's an element to our system, but we don't have laissez-faire capitalism anymore. So
by what mechanism is it decided that we're going to take this aspect from communism and this aspect from fascism?
Necessity from the war. and like just.
Okay.
But we're not going to find that out for a few chapters. But that's the answer. The answer is the British, in particular, have to survive in a way that no other country has to survive. They ramp their. I've talked about this before. War mobilization in Britain is something like 45 to 50% of the economy, which is huge. Nobody else gets close to that. But it's because Britain is more committed to the war than any other country in the world on either side. Britain has staked everything on it. Germany is like 35% until towards the late war. And one of the things I've said is, imagine if Germany ever mobilized in the way Britain did. I think they probably would have won before America stepped in. America peaks at about 40%. Anyone who thinks that Russia really did anything in the war besides die is the Soviet Union, that is, not Russia, is sorely mistaken. That like they could have done anything without America is a joke. Again, we'll see this in another chapter. The American war production is insane. They outproduce practically the rest of the world combined. And if you just look at air power alone, the Americans could have easily, in 1945, pushed on into Moscow. They very quickly would have used their equipment advantage to negate any Russian numbers. And especially if they'd used the Germans, as Patton said, the rest of the world, much of the rest of Europe, hated the USSR more than the Nazis, which is why not insignificant numbers of guys went and volunteered for the Germans against the communists. But that's future at chapters. Today, we're going to focus on the build up to that and the system that enabled such production and economic mobilization to occur. And so, like, one of the ways you can think about it is managerial. This is managerialism, the pluralist economy. There really isn't any ideology. I mean, managerialism, I take it, develops an ideology of managerialism later on, but at the beginning, it is more just like what works. Let's just do what works, yeah. And that's what you see.
The justifications are made to fit into what works rather than the other way around.
Yeah,
the ideology comes after. Yeah.
So are we? Is everything going fine? Do we see what kind of delay is there? Am I sounding okay?
You sound okay, yeah.
Okay.
I'm waiting for this slide to change.
There's a lot of delay. Okay.
It works.
All right. Does that mean that the audio going out is synced up with...
It is, yeah.
Okay, good. So, the last 3 chapters that we did were a look at 3 of the main players in politically what was going on with them. The first one was the USSR, and the sort of the insanity of Stalin and how Stalin maneuvered his way to power by sort of not garnering public attention, but privately sort of earning favors and loyalty with people. The next was Germany, and I think the standout thing about that was, one, the factionalism within the Nazis, how the different blocks in Germany, civil servants, the army, landlords, and industry sort of initially used the Nazis, how the Nazis were happy to then sort of bend their ideology towards what fit. How the ideology was Hitler. It wasn't anything really in particular. It wasn't economic policies or anything like that. And then we looked at Britain. And the other thing to say about the Germans is they have a lot of external civilization, and the British have a lot of internal civilization. So, like, if you were to drop a German in the middle of Africa, Quigley suggests that they would descend into barbarism extremely quickly. Whereas if you dropped a British person into Africa, a Britishman, he would start developing civilization around him. There's the Confucius quote that if you put the civilized man amongst barbarians, he will civilize them. Something like that. I can't remember. It's certainly in the Analects. I don't know where. And I think that's sort of... And so Quigley would say that the English are the pinnacle of civilization because of that.
And I really like the image of the 3-piece suit and the top hat and sipping tea in the middle of the Amazon rainforest or something.
There was this determination wherever they went that they were going to keep standards up. And one of the strange things is that they've left. Those standards have declined in England. But if you go to certain places around the former empire, you still see a glimpse of it that don't exist anywhere in England. And I talked to a guy, and I mean, this is like 8 years ago now, but he said he used to go to Sri Lanka once or twice a year because his wife was Sri Lankan. And he said, in the highlands of Sri Lanka, you'll be riding around and there will be these immaculate hotels with cricket greens and 2 teams playing in all whites. And, it's rare to see that in England anymore. And they stop and break for tea, that sort of thing. So, yeah, there very much was this idea that, and it's like slightly, to say that they're extremely civilized is not to say that they're sane. There's something kind of crazy about it, but crazy in like a wonderful way. There's an old saying that only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the noonday sun, because there's this determination to not let external elements get to you. And everything's understated. There's the guy who was with, I believe it was Scott's Antarctic expedition, and he got up. They're in the middle of a blizzard. I think they all died anyway, but someone recorded this in the journal, that he said he got up in the middle of this blizzard in this tent, and he said, I'm just going for a short walk. I might be a while because I don't know my way around here. And he walked out into the blizzard, and his body was never found. But what he was saying was, and everyone knew it, was, I'm going to go and die so as not to waste food.
Whoa, okay.
So, but he wouldn't say that. And that sort of spirit pervades the English, especially the upper classes. And as I said about the British, they have this, the education system is a moral one. It is not about finding the truth. It is about having a standard of behavior that you carry with you. And incredibly concerned with what's fair play. And I think that when Indians or Africans or whoever it may be in the former colonies criticize the English or the British for a lack of, like, being liars or somehow being disingenuous, I think they don't understand what the British are, and or what it means, or they have an expectation. I think it's kind of a cultural problem. I don't think that the British really fundamentally are untrustworthy in the way that the third world seems to think. I think the third world doesn't understand the English, the standards, and the hope that the English had that they were going to improve these places. There are a few exceptions, but I think even those can be contextualized. But yeah, so that's the recap of the recent chapters. Today, we're going to be looking at economic progress, or the lack thereof, in the 20th century. Britain, Germany, France, America, the economic changes in the 20th century. And there's a few here that are really important that I'm going to talk about. And the emergence of the pluralist economy. This, and I'm going to say now, this could be, if I'm not careful, this could be a long episode. So if I go through the description of the countries a bit, I don't want it to be thought that this is all there is that Quigley is saying about Britain, Germany, France, and America. There's a lot there, but I risk making this like a 2.5 hour episode, and I don't think I can talk that long, and I don't think people will listen that long. So, yeah. So
is the title for today's lecture really the economic foundations of the military-industrial complex?
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah.
Okay.
And you can see I've made a mistake, and I've left a previous slide title. I just copy the previous slides because the format's the same, so ignore that. That should be, the title for that should be sort of the outline of production. Production in needs at least 6 things. It quickly tells us. It needs knowledge, time, energy, materials, land, and labor. These things interact, and they produce. In the simplest economy of farming, you need to know how to plant. You need the time to plant. You need the energy, and that goes with labor in this example, to plant. You need the energy from the sun. You need materials. You need water, fertilizer, and you need somewhere to do it, and you need someone to plant it. If you want to grow that system, it seems to be some sort of like axiom of reality that you need to be producing more than you're consuming. You need a surplus. So economic progress needs innovation. It needs these previous 6 things, but it also needs at least one of these: innovation, savings, or investment. What you want in order to what this might look like is, well, it might look like the ability to a new type of plow, right? That unlocks, multiplies the amount of labor going in. It gets deeper into the soil where there are more nutrients, so more crops will grow. You might do it via savings. You might just have the ability to temporarily live beyond the means of production by having, instead of, say, 10 guys working the field, 20 guys. You get 10 more guys and you get them in the fields. And investment maybe is not a great example here. The savings and investment go very, very close. They're very tightly coupled here, because that's investment that is being using savings. So you need these things working together in order to produce surpluses, and this is an important thing.
By the way, what slide are you on? It's not moving, I think.
Okay. I'm just going to restart the thing.
Renegade might have found the Confucius quote. 9:14. The master wished to dwell among the uncivilized tribes. Someone said, "What would you do about their crudeness?" The master said, "When a Junzi dwells among them, what crudeness could there be?"
Yeah. The problem that Africa has, the problem that India has, is not that the British aren't there to give them technology. It's that the British aren't there for them to show off for. I've never been to India. I have no desire to go to India. But one of the things that you'll hear is, for people who do go to India, is this incredible desire on the part of Indians to show off for the British. I was reading Kipling's White Man Burden, which is probably his most controversial poem. And in there, I'll just read a little bit of it. And he says, take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. All ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silence... Oh, no, that's not the right one. Silence among peoples shall weigh your gods in you. That's not the one. That's not the stanza I was thinking of. Take up the white man's burden. It's the first stanza. Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' needs. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild. Your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. There's a lot to be said about the British Empire, and I think that... Is that going now? Okay. The British Empire, I think, was at its best when it wasn't worrying about civilizing. That the civilizing was something that was happening as a side effect. When it became the main purpose of the empire, it falls apart. In part because I think that's impossible to do intentionally, but also because the people that are trying to do it intentionally are nonconformist Christians on their way to atheism, if they haven't already gotten there, who have replaced Christian morality or in the process of replacing Christian morality with utilitarianism. Because utilitarianism is the only ethical system. It's not even a morality. It's the only ethical system that remains for the atheist. Because everything that you're doing is just a weighing up of consequences. So, why are we still talking about the British? What was my point? I can't remember. The British Empire, Kipling. Yeah, I think that there is something to be said about like memetics or generative anthropology, that like the quickest way to seed civilization in Africa, the quickest way to seed like some sort of like civic responsibility is to have an Englishman walking around, chastising and encouraging the natives. And I don't care how parochial or patronizing that sounds. I think just about the only place that doesn't need that, and I'm not pandering to you, Jeff, is East Asia. It's just about the only place in the world that doesn't need that. I kind of see civilization as spanning this sort of band from England to Japan, and civilization doesn't really exist south of that. Or
there's a theory related to that too. It's about the kind of climate and temperate zones or something like that, where people who live in these people who evolve, quote unquote, in these countries that have winter and summer and this kind of stuff, and these kind of certain temperate conditions, you can see the clear difference between them and people who are equatorial.
They have to
You can
plan.
see that.
An equatorial person can
Exactly,
always just go out and get something off the tree.
Yeah.
There's a 4chan green text about a guy who's in the Peace Corps, and he said, you can always, it's like living in the Garden of Eden. They don't ever accumulate savings to invest because there is no external pressure on them to do so by the environment. The environment always is able to provide them. So, yeah. So, okay, we're going to see towards the end of this, these things, this problem of innovation, savings, and investment is going to feed into the movements we see in these 4 countries that Quigley talks about. And when we look at the economic changes in the 20th century more abstractly, we'll see that the problems lie with these 9 factors in some component. Knowledge keeps going, time is still there, energy is still there, materials kind of factor in, land is still there, but labor is an issue. Innovation's okay, but savings and investment, particularly in the story of in the mid 19th century to when Quigley is writing in 1963, it's savings and investment are huge. But we're gonna come back to that. Now, I was under the gun today. I haven't been able to prepare slides for each country, so I'm just gonna talk fairly quickly, and I'm gonna keep an eye on the time, and I'm gonna try and not talk more than 10 minutes on each. We've already been going 30 minutes, so I just want to keep an eye on the time. So okay, Britain has a very interesting couple of things going on for it in this transition from financial capitalism to monopoly capitalism. One, Britain has the most savings of any country in the world. It has so much savings that it's able to export capital, but also the Bank of England is able to keep interest rates really low because, in fact, it has to keep them low because there's too much savings. And if you want to get capital to be used, one of the great ways, that is money, liquid capital, one of the great ways to do that is to keep interest rates low, because if you can get a better return building a factory than you can putting that in a bank, it's very good. But what that means is that with lots of savings comes the ability to finance projects without going to stock markets in the same way. So you're able to just sort of say at the club, oh, this thing is going in, this part of the country. It doesn't, and you're able to raise funds. This means that the business system in Britain is much more secretive, even to this day, than many other countries. And one of the ways you can see this is particularly with like the City of London and the structure of the City of London. The City of London is a sort of weird territory in the British Isles, which is self-governing in a way that nothing else is. It's almost like a independent city-state. It's incredibly small. When I say the City of London, I don't mean London. The City of London is about a square mile, and it's where lots of companies are headquarters and where lots of banks and financial and insurance activity is headquartered and takes place. In order to participate in the system of the City of London, you have to basically be a massive company. Companies have the ability to vote. There has been this really complicated process of who they can vote for and who can eventually become the mayor of the City of London, which carries no salary, but is still, that person's still expected to perform sort of ambassadorial duties for the City of London. So they basically, like, it's going to cost you like $500,000 if you ever could become the mayor of the City of London. This is an example. There's a lot out there conspiratorially about the City of London, and when I say conspiratorially, I don't mean that as a criticism. I'm just being descriptive. I think you'll know that I'm very open to conspiracy theories. I just mean it as an example of secret activity. So financial capitalism in Britain is very privately controlled. The system under financial capitalism, because it's self-financing. Now, one of the things I want you to keep in mind is that what is a strength in one era can be a weakness later. And this in some ways is very close to the idea that you keep seeing in Quigley, which is that everything contains within itself the seeds of its own destructions. For British financial capitalism, it's very private, and it is run in the interests of individuals. It is not strategic. When economic activity is needed that is less about profit motive and more about market control, British capitalism dies the British financial capitalism dies very quickly, and it very quickly becomes monopoly capitalism. Now, despite this secrecy and the privacy, it is very honest as an era as compared to America. And also, we're going to come back to the idea of like strategic, because the opposite of British financial capitalism is German financial capitalism, which is ultra strategic. And everyone who's in the German system is always prepared to act patriotically. The British are not the same way. They're much more individualistic. Now, 1931, monopoly capitalism sweeps in. Financial capitalism finally dies. There's a couple of things that go on there. Now, with monopoly capitalism comes a much bigger increase in cooperation and planning. Financial capitalism wants gold, that gold-backed currency. And if you'll remember, in 1931, the British finally give up on gold. Monopoly capitalism doesn't, because monopoly capitalism does not care about the value of money. Financial capitalism is predicated upon bankers, and monopoly capitalism is predicated on cartels and monopolies. In financial capitalism, you have this conflict between bankers and unions. In monopoly capitalism, this is in Britain, Monopoly capitalism, you have cooperation between capital and unions. Now that's counter to the narrative that we hear, but Quigley says on a macro scale, what you have is an alliance between business owners and labor, and the people that they're screwing are white collar people who are not unionized, but also don't control capital. Now, what triggers the death of monopoly capitalism is actually the Fleet Mutiny. In 1931, the Royal Navy refuses, the enlisted crew refused to obey orders because the government's pursuing a policy of deflation in order to preserve the value of money. What this means is that in real terms, their purchasing power is declining for the first time in like the history of the Royal Navy, and these guys are not prepared to go with less for the sake of the financial value of gold, of the financial value of the pound. This then, a few days later, is actually when they go off the gold standard. But it's actually the Fleet Mutiny, Quigley says, that causes this. Now, of course, we know this. If you know anything about economics, one of the things you'll have heard is that monopolies create inefficiencies. And this is true here. Cartels and trade associations form, and there's a lot of pressure, if not like a war, on businesses that are not prepared to conform to standards and practices. And there's this problem of what they're going after is market control, as I said, not profits. And what that means is that if you are too innovative, the monopoly cracks down on you. But it's worse than that. They actively go about destroying productive capabilities in order to maintain that market control. So, like the Shipbuilding Association levies a 1% tax on all shipbuilding contracts, and that 1% goes into a fund which is used to buy up and destroy shipyards. And Quigley says that in this period, in this interwar period, Britain, under monopoly capitalism, intentionally destroys a quarter of its shipbuilding capabilities via the Shipbuilding Association and the destruction of its capacity to build. Now, within this, the why do we have this politically? Well, the Tories, Quigley says, have always cared about the value of the pound rather than the productive capacity of the country. I suspect you could say that about the Tories up until 1995, is it? Black Thursday, when they have this obligation to maintain the value of the pound relative to this like theoretical currency that the rest of the European Union all coheres around. The euro has not yet appeared. There's like this European trading mechanism, and the British are obligated to, everyone's obligated to kind of keep their currencies relatively stable to this value. And the single biggest enemy of the state that Britain has had since the end of the Second World War, George Soros, sees this and he goes, I can exploit that. He declares financial war on Britain, and the Treasury and the Bank of England are forced into this insane, I can't remember the details of it, but this economic and monetary policy, and they're burning millions and millions, billions of pounds. And George Soros basically kind of like retires off of that. He doesn't need to do anything else after that financially. But that system of the Tories caring about the value of the pound is something that is only just really behind us. And even today, you hear it a lot. People don't understand that the guy on the street does not understand that the value of the pound doesn't affect his well-being in the way that he thinks it does. There's just very sort of like, oh, the pound is valuable, that's good. No, wrong. And what's happening also with this is that you have the emergence of new money with monopoly, and you have a blurring of classes. And it gets harder to distinguish between who's old and new money. And as I say, these old strengths of these sort of individualistic financial tendencies of Britain are very, very good in the past, but by the 20s and 30s, they're a weakness. And in some ways, the transition to monopoly capitalism is a lot cleaner because of that. But they have lacked... In many ways, this transition to monopoly capitalism marks the beginning of the end of Britain's sort of productive capacity, because they never really... they've never really been the productive powerhouse that they used to be after this. And that's Britain. Any questions before we do Germany?
Renegade just brings up he says the only reason why the Canadian dollar matters is because we want it less than the US dollar for trade reasons. It's not for any price of living kind of thing.
Right. And that's rational. That's what you want. A lower currency means more trade, which is good for your country, right? It means that you're domestically are getting more money coming in for the same piece of equipment than if it was higher. And even today, a lot of things are this is what the petrodollar is, right? The petrodollar is the fact that almost all oil deals are done denominated in dollar values. Now, what that does is a lot of things, but it kind of props up the value of the American dollar, and it means that the dollar can purchase more oil. So in this case, it's good for America to have a slightly higher value. The contention is that as what we're kind of seeing, like a transition to deals not being denominated in dollars, that the value of the dollar could collapse, especially with America's insane national debt. Germany benefits hugely from the euro because you have countries like Greece and Spain keeping the value of the euro down. So Germany can sell Mercedes and get more euros per Mercedes when they're sold to Saudi Arabia than if they were still on the Deutschmark. So currency, the value of the currency is really important. And if you want to trade, you want a low-valued currency. Speaking of Germany, Germany's a little bit quicker. They're much more dependent upon public financing of business because they don't have the same amount of private savings. They certainly have more, and they certainly have more than America does, which we'll see in a minute. But from the very beginning, bankers have a lot of control in Germany in the way that they don't in other countries. If you had stock deposited in the bank vaults, you did not have the right to vote with the stock. It was the bankers who held the stocks, who had the right to vote those stocks. If you had stocks owned on margins, you did not have the right to vote with have voting rights to those stocks until you'd fully paid off the value of the stock. So bankers keep a lot of control of business, and they very quickly developed the system of interlocking businesses because the bankers are on the boards or controlling the boards of just about any company of any size. This facilitates itself incredibly to monopoly capitalism because they're all, you're setting up supply chains from one business to another, all controlled by the same group. And the stats on like the amount that cartels controlled for coal in Germany in this period is huge, and it's something like there are 5 cartels, and 2 of them control like 80% of all the coal in the country. Okay, here it is. And then this is about coal mines, I believe. There are 260 mining companies. Of the total output, 21 companies had 90% of the output. 5 companies had 50% of the output, and 1 had 14% of the output. These mines were organized into 5 cartels, of which 1 controlled 81% of the output, and 2, the top 2 together, controlled 94% of the output. And 69% of all total output were from mines which were owned subsidiaries of other corporations that used coal. So there's a lot of conglomerate behavior going on in Germany, and they really know how to do it. And the monster that gets created is IG Farben. And IG Farben quickly has this quote that, like, it's been said, Germany couldn't have fought either world war without IG Farben agreeing to fight with them. The Germans are much more open, but they're also much more strategic and patriotic. And they very quickly realize that it's in their interest to help the Nazis against communism. Now, post-1945, you get this interesting situation which can kind of like explain the Germany that we have today. There's no real rebuilding that happens in Germany for 5 years. It's not till 1950. This is West Germany I'm speaking of, and I'm pretty sure Quigley is too. There's 5 years of like almost no work. They're incredibly poor. They're just living off of like American grain shipments. And then the Marshall Plan comes in, and they've got a huge advantage. The first major advantage they have is they don't have any old technology. They don't have to worry about this process of like, yeah, but my old machine is still pretty good. They just, from 1950 onwards, start having cutting-edge technology doing everything. So their productive capacity compared to American or British or French is much higher on a one-for-one basis or on a machine-for-machine basis, because all their machines are brand new. The second thing is they have really low taxes because they have virtually no army. It's only like the mid-50s that the Germans start to have an army again, and it's only because America wants them to in order to help them fight off the Soviet Union. America hasn't wanted Japan to have an army because it doesn't have anyone that it wants Japan to act as a bulwark against. But now, as 2 things happen, as serious concerns about China acting in the West Pacific increase, and as the American tendrils on Japan weaken, Japan's gonna probably, you want to make a bet, Jeff, that by the end of the decade, Japan will have an army again? I don't know how much you think about this stuff, but I think we'll see it by the end of the decade. So it
doesn't sound too far-fetched.
So there's no there are low taxes because there's no defense budget to pay for. And the other thing is, and this is the most interesting thing, you have a workforce that's been out of work for 5 years, and they can finally get jobs again. So you have an incredibly complacent workforce that is prepared to work with industry and do whatever. And I think that like that in particular still survives. It's sort of going away now, but the last like 80 years of the German economy have this like memory at somewhere of these 5 years where it's just like, let's not strike, because we just want to be super efficient workers so that we never have to go through that again. That's Germany. All right. France. France is the biggest section in this chapter. And I've said this before, I think here, I think that the history of France, particularly since the last 200 years, has a lot of lessons for us that we don't think about. And it's also got a lot of political thought that we don't get. Because you'll get Camus and Sartre translated, and Foucault, you'll get pedophiles translated. You're not going to get the ultra-royalists translated, because the left-wing media doesn't want any, gold mine of French royalist or French reactionary thought to come in. So I think if you want to see like media control anywhere, I think like piece of shit, like what's his name? He wrote a book called Capital, like Marx. It's not Marx, and he wrote it like 5 or 10 years ago. A French economist, very left wing. It's got some interesting ideas in it that I don't think are wrong, but it's left wing, and we get that translated. We don't get the Catholic integralist thinkers translated.
You're talking about Thomas Piketty, right?
Piketty, yeah. So France has the financial capitalism of France. So yeah, learn French is what I'm thinking. I want to learn French. I think there's something there. There's some untapped gold mine of French right wing thought. France has 3 groups that control financial capitalism. In around the 1750s, you have the appearance of bankers from Switzerland, and they're Swiss Protestants, and they wield power. Napoleon helps them, and they help Napoleon until Napoleon is on his way out, and then they kind of just like bury him. In the post-Napoleon, you have the appearance of Jewish bankers. You have 2 groups of Jewish bankers. You have the Ashkenazi coming in from Germany, and you have Sephardic bankers coming up from Iberia. Now, these 2 groups can be seen, the difference between them can be seen in that the Swiss Protestants are much more conservative and imperialistic, and the Jewish bankers are much more progressive and liberal. So the system that replaces Napoleon is called the July Monarchy. It's the last time. It's the brother of Louis XVI, the guy who gets beheaded. His brother comes in. I think he takes the name Louis XVIII, because in the French system, an heir that never takes the throne but lives is counted, which is why you have Louis XVI gets beheaded. Louis XVII, his son, is given to some farmers, and he's basically neglected until he dies. He dies of like consumption at the age of like 15 or 16. And then his uncle, Louis XVI's brother, takes the throne. And even though Louis XVII never sits on the throne, the French give him that respect, and Louis XVIII becomes Louis XVIII. That's the July Monarchy. Louis XVIII flees. It's not a terribly long time that the July Monarchy lasts, and Louis XVIII flees. And then you have, and the Swiss Protestants are like weirdly anti the July Monarchy because it's kind of like reformist. I think that's why they're against it. I know, and the Jewish bankers are pro. The July monarchy gets replaced by the Second Republic, which doesn't last a terribly long time. And the Second Republic becomes the Second Empire. The Second Republic elects as president Napoleon's nephew, and he becomes Napoleon III. Now, same thing with the Louis. Napoleon II doesn't ever occupy the throne, but the French still accord him the place of the second, and therefore Napoleon III, even though there's only two Napoleons controlling France, he becomes Napoleon III. Now, Napoleon III gets elected president, and in 1848, he declares the French Empire, the Second Empire. The Swiss Protestants are pro-Second Empire, and the Jewish bankers are anti. Now, the Third Republic rolls around in 1871, after the French lose the Franco-Prussian War. The Swiss Protestants are anti-Third Republic, and the Jewish bankers are pro-Third Republic. Now, around 1838, something else happens. You have the emergence of a third group, which is Catholic bankers. But the Catholic bankers very quickly split into two groups. And so half of those Catholic bankers go and join the Jews, and you have this Jewish Catholic alliance led by Rothschild. The other half of the Catholics go and join the industrialists, and you get this alliance led by a guy named Schneider, who is, even though he has a German name, he's French, who's like a steel magnate. And then the Protestant bankers continue on sort of by themselves. Now, the big thing that happens with all this that really starts to push transition from financial capitalism to monopoly capitalism is in France is railways, and the demand for new financing and public financing, and creating new logistics and scales and industry in order to build these industries. Now, when the railway's done, this heavy industry pivots into arms development and the arms manufacturing. Now, the thing about, from the very beginning, the French system is about market control, and they're very cooperative. These three blocks, despite competing with one another for market control, they still cooperate a lot in other areas. But because of this, they're not really committed to financial capitalism in the way that the other three countries are. And so there is no financial capitalism block and monopoly capitalism block. All blocks are invested in both, and so they sort of gently transition into monopoly capitalism, and there's no great struggle. Now, the other thing that these as I said, these factions, where they put aside their difference is control of the central bank, the Bank of France, and you have this thing called the 40 families. There are 200 families that have sort of investments in the Bank of France, and they elect 40 representatives. And so, Quigley says, there's this phrase, the 200 families that control France. Actually, it's more like 40. I think there's something to be said there on a standalone episode, maybe about some of these central banks. I'd like to do something on central banking. It's not really the time. I didn't go make enough notes about this because it's interesting, but it's not super pertinent to this chapter or really Tragedy and Hope, because Tragedy and Hope doesn't really care about France. Now, the other thing to say is Rothschild really wanted an alliance with the Soviets. The Rothschild bloc gets obviously annihilated by the Nazis. the Swiss Protestant faction is very invested in heavy industry, and heavy industry gets particularly badly hit by the Great Depression. And so what you have is this emergence of the Catholic Industrial Alliance. I think they're the ones that take over, but Quigley calls it the Lille to Lyon axis. And Lille is in northeast France, and Lyon is in southeast France. And if you go down that eastern bit of France, you get like their industrial area, which has four big standout things that it does: electrical utilities, chemicals, artificial textiles, and light metals. Those are like one of the problems with Britain is it never maintains after the 20s pioneering industries in the way that the French do. The French, even today, the French are building nuclear power plants in England. EDF, the French power company, is building a nuclear power plant in I think it's Somerset, Hinkley Plant C. They're still innovative in chemicals and yeah, they're very good at maintaining their industry. France has been a bit weird because it never fully committed to the American system. I'm getting Peter Zion now. I'm channeling him. They never fully commit to the American system, and that financially hurts them. But the other thing that means is they're not fully exposed to America. So when America does badly, the French don't feel it in the way that other Western countries do. They're able to kind of just keep doing their own thing. And Peter Zian says that France is the country in Europe that you're going to want to be in over the next 30 years. Now, I don't think he's factoring a certain peaceful religion when he says that. But in terms of economic, in terms of material analysis, I think he's right. Now, this block rivalry between these three, even though they can cooperate in certain areas, it really paralyzes France. It doesn't really allow them to properly be prepared for the Second World War. And this Lille to Lyon block also really benefits under Vichy France. It becomes like Vichy France's focus. And then they kind of just look the other way about this after the war. But France kind of struggles between, the 30s and about 1958. They have Vietnam and the Algeria Revolution, which is a fascinating topic in and of itself. Algeria specifically. But they do have a bright spot that comes out in this period in 1957, which is the Treaty of Rome. The Treaty of Rome is the foundation of the European Economic Community, or the Common Market, as it's called. What happens in 1958, though, that really triggers a French revival is de Gaulle calls an end to the Fourth Republic and starts the Fifth Republic. We're now in the Fifth Republic. And the Fifth Republic gives much more power to the president to be dictatorial, if you want to say that. And de Gaulle devalues the franc, and the Marshall Plan starts to be felt, the benefits of the Marshall Plan. There's other things that go on there. I think de Gaulle is the assassination attempt against de Gaulle happens before 58. I'm not sure about that. Now, but the common market really helps because you now have these like economies of scale shared by Italy, France, Germany, and what was called Benelux, Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. Britain tries to join in, I believe it's 1960. But de Gaulle denies them, in part. I can't remember why. What was in part? What was it in part of? It's like some payback for something. I can't remember at the moment. But what Quigley says, why de Gaulle denies them, vetoes their membership, is because he doesn't want a seventh member, a British member, with a veto that is essentially an American puppet. Now, this is in 1963. In the 70s, one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had, Ted Heath, brings us into the common market as it's then known. The common market, the EEC, European Economic Community, operates a common market. It's one of the facets of the EEC. The EEC then becomes the European Union. Now, there's, I can't remember. He does an interview on William Buckley's show, that old William F. Buckley show. And it's a British politician or a British journalist, and he's talking. He says, and this is in the 80s or the late 70s, and he says, what de Gaulle was afraid of was exactly what America wanted. America always wanted Britain in the common market so that it had a voice for American ideology and American interests. I love England. I genuinely love England. But I despise the way that the English, and this goes for the Canadians and the Australians and the New Zealanders too, the way we have whored ourselves to America. America is this abomination golem, and I hate it. And we just bend over backwards for America. Whenever America needs something, we're an ally. Whenever we need something, America's nowhere to be found. And you can see this in that, America ignores British interests around the world whenever it wants to. Margaret Thatcher was livid with Reagan. It was the lowest moment of the relationship between Thatcher and Reagan when Reagan invaded Grenada, because Grenada's in the Commonwealth. And Thatcher said, yeah, there was something going on there, but I deserved a phone call. And America just went in with no communication to Britain whatsoever. Now, a couple of years later, the Argentinians invade the Falklands, and Britain pulls off just about the most miraculous military feat of the post-war era. And that goes into 2023, right? 80 years. We send this task force halfway around the world, and with no reinforcements and no chances if anything went wrong. And we kick the shit out of the Argentinians. And what does America do? Nothing. It's deafeningly quiet. And even today, I think it was Hillary Clinton put out, when she was Secretary of State, put out documents referring to Las Malvinas rather than the Falklands. America's not our friend. And I cannot wait until everyone in this country, everyone in the Commonwealth, anyone in a country that speaks English as its primary language that isn't America, wakes up to the fact that America's not its friend. And hey, if you're living in America, I hope you wake up to the fact that America isn't your friend either. It's I have no problem with Americans. I like them quite a lot. But the government and the political system that America is awful, and it's corrupted, and it hasn't just become corrupted since a certain point. It's been fundamentally corrupted from the very beginning. Anyway, so I really respect France for its ability to maintain its independence. That's France. Any questions, Jeff? On my rant, even on my rant about America?
Renegade's like, Bucklander likes England? There's no way.
I can't.
That was a good rant, though, I think. It's worthy of a YouTube short, a future YouTube short.
Well, speak of the devil. Now we got America. Now,
The rant continues.
this is Quigley now. Quigley says American financial capitalism is incredibly corrupt. It's awful, right? There's a wonderful book I'm reading called Nature's Metropolis, which is about how Chicago emerges as a... It's written by a liberal. It's a wonderful book for a book written by a liberal. It's about how Chicago was destined to emerge as the city that would dominate the center of America, that would not dominate commodity production in America. And the stories of corruption that you get in that book are quite interesting, because a large part of that book takes place in this like 1840s to 1900. There's incredible land speculation that goes on in Chicago over empty blocks because everyone knows it's going to be huge, and people make millions, hundreds of thousands, and lose it the next day. And it's all because of this like weird system. But the big thing that motivates America is economically is it never has enough labor, at least in this period. Now it's got too much labor, or at least too much welfare. And it's always had to be better at developing capital. It doesn't have the savings to fund these things, so it's always been dependent upon financing from government and foreign investors. This kind of blows up the idea that America was some sort of like bastion of the free market. It's always had a lot of government intervention in order to build its infrastructure in a way that other countries haven't had to. Now here, you can see this incredible incentive to innovate. And if you remember back, one of the things that happens, that Quigley describes in his philosophy, right, not his history, is that you have the core, the semi-periphery, and the periphery. And America's firmly in the periphery. Now, this might just be true of America, but it might be true of other peripheral empires that arise. Because remember, Quigley says that the global, the universal empire that will occupy a civilization will come from the periphery. The periphery will always be better at the material culture, and will always be worse at the non-material culture, what I kind of think of as the spiritual side of a civilization. But this might explain why peripheral empires come to dominate, because they always tend to be less densely populated than the cores, which means they have to innovate, and they're much more dependent upon material than on capital to support them than the core is. The core can always depend upon labor. So like you kind of can see this with like China and Taiwan, right? China is sort of, even today, I don't know, have you ever been to Taiwan, Jeff? When was the last time you went?
Many times. I went before my daughter was born, so 3 years ago.
Okay,
4
well,
years ago in Europe.
So unless something like drastics happened in Taiwan, right, in the last couple of years, like if you had to give China a technological value out of 10 and Taiwan a technological value out of 10, and like by China I mean like mainland, what would you give it?
Honestly, China is actually way more technologically advanced.
Really? That's
Well,
but
maybe not way more, but certainly if you go to a major like tier 1 city in China, it's kind of like it feels like Singapore or something.
Okay, that though I would speculate is because they're concentrating that. Like if you went to a tier 2 or a tier 3
Right, yeah.
city, but like
Right,
but
and-
also, but like so like nationally. And the other thing is, even if it were true nationally, that's only like the last 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So like Taiwan is peripheral to, so like, okay, my example might not have been the best one, but Taiwan's peripheral, and it's much better. Like if you look at semiconductors, which is like its holy grail, the jewel in the crown, China can't do anything like the semiconductor production that Taiwan can. That's the sort of point I'm trying to make. Like Taiwan has, at least for the last 80 years, until the last 10, let's just say until 2000, Taiwan has been much more dependent upon capital, and the mainland has been much more dependent upon labor because it has excesses of labor. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting thing that we can kind of like. This isn't even something Quigley says himself. I just thought like, can we start to see like validation for Quigley's theory in this fact here? Now the transition now, and Quigley says financial capitalism in America lasts longer than in any other country. This is a couple of reasons, but what really causes the transition is the Republicans are majorly committed to the financial sector. The Depression crashes the system, and because everyone knows how close a relationship is between Republicans and financial system, support shifts to the Democrats. You have like the SEC forming, and I think this is Glass-Steagall. You have the separation of investment and savings banking. And here is the thing. Mark this, right? Because this is where I think the series is now going to take off. You have the start of the New Deal. And what this does is a sort of like, this is a way to keep the economy going via public spending. But the New Deal stops in 1936. And what happens? Quigley, writing in 1963, says America experiences the worst economic downturn it ever experiences in 1936 when the New Deal stops. And what happens? They essentially start the New Deal up again. And since 1936, you have had a system by which the American system is being sustained, and I'm extrapolating this out past 1963 when Quigley's writing. The American system is not being tied down by massive government spending. The American system is being kept going by massive government spending. Because in 1936, the Americans can see what's coming. They start to rearm. They then have the Lend-Lease Act with Britain, which I will be talking about. We will have a whole episode at some point of me ranting like a madman about the Lend-Lease Act. It might be after Quigley. It might be on a separate book that I want to do an episode on. But you have the rearmament industry. You have the rearmament process. And then after that, you have the Cold War. And then after that, you have the space race. And then after 1963, things keep going. And then just as we're supposed to get in 1994, Clinton gets up and he starts talking about the peace dividend. We only get the peace dividend for 7 years before September 11th happens and government spending kicks off again. Like the defense spending just starts to tick down, and boom, it's off again. You have LBJ and the Great Society and the welfare state coming out. America is government spending. I thought this was where I started to go, oh shit, this is where it's coming together for me. I don't know about you, but I really thought like this is Quigley giving us something really useful and counter to what we're constantly told. That's America. That's the view globally. Now, there's some economic factors in this slide, but before I do that, do you have any questions like historically?
Not in the chat. But you're saying that even to this day, that the American economy is completely reliant on government spending,
and that it wouldn't be America if they stopped government spending. It would be a different system. The American system for 87 years has been built around this. Just like the Germans have a very docile workforce, the American system now is government intervention. It is not... Americans, when they talk about Europe, when they talk about the rest of the world, I would hear this thing growing up. We're the freest country in the world. We don't intervene. That's socialism, that sort of thing. I always say to people like who complain about Britain and praise America, I say to them, yeah, sure, free speech in Britain is a joke. A guy got arrested yesterday or the day before because he put up a video of a street in London that had in eyesight 5 or 6 Palestinian flags, and he said, why are all these Palestinian flags here? They shouldn't be here. We shouldn't have let these people into our country. And he got arrested for that. In Canada, they want to... We might have to, we might be in trouble, Jeff, because I've heard Trudeau wants oversight of the content of all podcasts.
That's only podcasts that make money, which I
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, don't give us money, guys. But those things are crazy. And yeah, America's much better at freedom of speech. But there's a lot of other ways that America is worse off than Canada or Europe or Australia, New Zealand. It is not clear cut. It's not one thing or the other. It's so much more complicated. I don't know how to put this, but there's just tension, right? In some ways, the world is so much more simple than we think it is, and in other ways, the world is so much more complicated than we think it is. And the problem is figuring out that in that moment, whether you're dealing with something that's being oversimplified or overcomplicated. Okay, so the economic factors that emerge in the 20th century, there are 9 of them. And again, I'm saying this again, this is in 1963. This is not 2023. Often what I'm doing when I'm talking about events after 1963 is I'm speculatively filling in the blanks that have developed since then in a way that I think Quigley would. You have rising standards of living. What rising standards of living do is it creates an expectation of further rising standards of living. You can have systems, as Quigley says, where you do not have continually improving standards of living. But what we have is not just a rising standard, but an expectation. And so when rising standards fail to materialize, our system gets angry. Our political discourse gets angry. And let alone when you actually get a reduction in real terms in the standards of living as we have lived through in the last year, 18 months. We also have the rise of industrialism. We've talked about that. We talked about, particularly around the First World War. And we'll see it further in the Second World War. Quigley is sort of in this chapter, he's sort of, as I've made references to things that happened after the Second World War, sort of we're going over the Second World War. We're jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit. This power to produce all these things, all these 9 economic factors are all tied in together. So industrialism allows for the rising standards of living. You have a growth in the size of the enterprises that are participating in these activities. You have something like IG Farben, DuPont, Ford, these massive companies that are bigger than any other economic enterprise that has pre-existed them. Now, that's 1 through 3. 4, 5, 6, and 7, I thought, were really, really, really significant. To the point that I'm tempted to read them out if I can, if you've no objections, Jeff. The disposal of ownership of enterprises. This is cool. Disposal of ownership of enterprise was a natural result of the growth of size of enterprise and was made possible by the corporate method of organization. As corporations increased in size, it became less and less possible for any individual or small group to own any important fractions of their stocks. In most countries, the number of security holders increased faster than the number of outstanding securities. In the United States, the former increased in numbers 7 times as fast as the latter from 1900 to 1928. This was a greater spread than in other countries, but elsewhere there was also a considerable spreading out of corporate ownership. This was exactly contrary to the prediction of Karl Marx that the owners of industries would get fewer and fewer as well as richer and richer. Now, they are getting richer and richer, but that's still an interesting one. 5. The separation of control from ownership. The separation of ownership from control has already been mentioned. It was an inevitable counterpart of the advent of the corporate form of business organization. Indeed, the corporate form was devised for this very purpose. That is, to mobilize the capital owned by many persons into a single enterprise controlled by a few. As we have seen, this inevitable counterpart was carried to a quite unexpected degree by the devices invented by financial capitalism. This, I think, is one of the major themes of Quigley's book and of the 20th century. The realization, initially by finance, but later on modeled throughout the entire system, that you did not need to own in order to control. And the single biggest example I can give is the difference between the British Empire and the American Empire. The British Empire owned and tried to control. The American Empire doesn't own and does control. And I think this lesson gets absorbed at every level, in every way. You no longer need to own in order to control. And of course, wrapped up in this is Burnham, but concentration of control. The concentration of control was also inevitable in the long run, but here also was carried by special devices to an extraordinary degree. As a result, in the highly industrialized countries, the economic systems were dominated by a handful of industrial complexes. The French economy was dominated by 3 powers, Rothschild, Mirabeau, and Schneider. The German economy was dominated by 2, IG Farben and Vereinigte Stahlwerk. I'm sorry if I didn't say that right. The United States was dominated by 2, Morgan and Rockefeller. Other countries like Italy or Britain were dominated by somewhat larger numbers. In no country was the power of these great complexes paramount and exclusive, and in no country were these powers able to control the situation to such a degree that they were able to prevent their own decline under the impact of world political and economic conditions. But their ability to dominate their spheres is undeniable. In France, Rothschild and Schneider were not able to weather the assault of Hitler. In Germany, Thyssen was not able to withstand the attacks of Flick and Goering. In the United States, Morgan was unable to prevent the economic swing from financial to monopoly capitalism, and yielded quite gracefully to the rising power of DuPont. Now, in Britain, likewise, the masters of financial capitalism yielded to the masters of chemical products and vegetable oils. What? Once the inevitable writing on the wall had been traced out in a convincing fashion. but all these shifts of power within the individual economic systems indicate merely that individuals or groups are unable to maintain their positions in the complex flux of modern life and do not indicate any decentralization of control. On the contrary, even as groups succeeds groups, the concentration of control becomes greater. Vegetable oils. Yeah, like I mentioned Unilever a couple episodes ago in episode 5.
Yeah.
Unilever is founded on vegetable oils. Like I this is one of the things where I was starting to get conspiratorial about Unilever. Like there's something here. If you could, I hope to get to this one day. If some enterprising individual hears this, though, they can by all means steal this from me. There's something about seed oils wrapped up in the modern system in a way that we don't have any appreciation for. The last one I'm going to read is number 7, decline in control. A decline of control. A decline in competition is a natural consequence of the concentration of control. Decline in competition, I wrote. And so that should be decline of competition, not decline of control. This decline in competition refers, of course, only to price competition in the market. Since this was the mechanism which made the economic system function in the 19th century, this decline is evident to all students of modern economics and is one of the most widely discussed aspects of the modern economic system. It is caused not only by the activities of businessmen, but also by the actions of labor unions, of governments, of private social welfare organizations, and even of the herd-like behavior of consumers themselves. Those 4, 5, 6, and 7 around ownership and control, I think, are the 4 most revealing things about the modern economic world and how we got where we are.
Yeah. Some of this stuff also dovetails with Jacques Ellul. You mentioned something about decentralization or concentration of control. So it's actually that despite decentralization of ownership, control is actually being centralized. I think there's another element to that, which is that control is also being depersonalized.
Yeah.
If you read something like the biography of David Rockefeller, you can see that, so you mentioned Rockefeller and the other one,
Morgan.
J.P. Morgan, being dominating the American economy. At the same time, David Rockefeller, who was chairman of Chase Bank, always had difficulty with kind of like fighting the dealing with the internal politics of his company.
Yeah. And Quigley does say earlier that Morgan is the champion of financial capitalism and Rockefeller is the champion of monopoly capitalism. And so we are going to talk. This is coming up in the bit on the pluralist economy, the system by which the pluralist economy is managed by rationalistic and scientific thought.
Yeah. Maybe another way of putting that is like mechanisms.
Yeah.
That there's just less and less space for the human factor, and that everything is slowly becoming more and more mechanized. So it's weird. It's like control is being centralized, but also it's being taken out of the hands of individuals.
Yeah. It's being so centralized that the center isn't even a person.
Yeah.
The center is a more concentrated sort of artificial mind than exists in a person.
Yeah.
A mind, in a way, a mind designed to do things that the human mind is not designed to do. So 8, 9 are there's more to say about that, but it's in the next slide. Increasing income disparity. So like even though all this ownership is happening, the difference between the rich are making more in income and the poor are making less. And now, again, going back to Quigley's sort of philosophy of civilizations, declining rates of expansion leading to crisis. And the crisis is the Second World War for Quigley. Quigley said, if you'll remember way back, we're the only civilization that is able to go back and have a new age of expansion after the age of crisis, and we've done it 3 times. And what Tragedy and Hope is a history of the third crisis and the tragedy of that and the hope of a fourth age of expansion. Whether or not we've achieved that fourth age of expansion, I think is still too early to tell, though I am pessimistic about it. But that is what Tragedy and Hope is. So,
I guess the technological optimist would look to something like the digital sphere as the new age of expansion.
Right. Well, it could. I thought of either data or space. Space was the only other thing that I could think of that like had the potential. There's a study that came out a couple of days ago. I was reading about it that some economists have modeled the viability of asteroid harvesting, and they think that in 20 to 30 years, like asteroid harvesting of like cobalt and nickel could be more than what is produced annually on Earth. And if we're going down this road of electrical, of batteries, and of green energy, cobalt and nickel are big for those. Now, there's two sort of pursuits of deflation that we're jumping back to the Great Depression and to the 30s. There's 2 tactics by which you can deflate the economy when you've got inflation going crazy. One is you can destroy goods, and it quickly does say that happen. Now, here's the other thing, though. The second is where you get the other major plank. You can make goods that never enter the marketplace. Can you think of a good, Jeff, that is not for sale, but we make a lot of it, and when used, it doesn't actually produce anything, but actually decreases things? Riddle me this.
You mean never enters the marketplace as in the general market, but it
Yeah.
is sold somewhere?
Yeah,
Weapons?
exactly. The arms manufacturing that kicks off in 1936 never ends, and it is the perfect way of destroying inflation in a way, because this economic activity is still happening, and people are getting paid for it, and there's somebody buying it, but it's not going out on the market. So it's not, but it's also not actively like destroying like goods. So this takes off as a way of like in this period in the late 30s, or that midway point in the 30s, the mid 30s onwards, arms manufacturing really takes off as a way of not just making arms, not just equipping yourself for the coming war, but as a way of having a mechanism that controls your economy. So that is the other big thing. What did I say? There were three things that came together. Oh, right, and the arms manufacturing. I can't remember now, but I can think of two of them: arms manufacturing and the pluralist economy. Now, there are 5 ways in which the pluralist economy works. Before that, though, I'll say this: there are 4 prior global economic systems to the pluralist economy. You have laissez-faire capitalism, you have communism, fascism, and what Quigley calls the underdeveloped or the undeveloped. And all 4 of these areas can start to adopt the system developed that is the pluralist economy. The first point in the pluralist economy, these five ways that the pluralist economy works, is you have a central allotment of resources. What these the way that the system, there are 3 areas that goods can be allocated. They can be allocated to consumers in consumer goods. They can be allocated towards capital investment for consumer goods, or they can be allocated to the public sector. And the arms industry is situated under the public sector because only the public sector is able to buy B-52s. I don't care how many bitcoins you have. Try and go buy an F-35. You can't do it. The second thing is the decision making about resource allocation is made amongst a set of interest groups, and this is corporatism. This is sort of like where fascism is seen in the system. So, like central allocation of resources, well, that's communism, or at least socialism. The corporatism here is sort of light fascism. And there are 11 groups. There's the defense forces, there's labor, farmers, heavy industry, light industry, transport and communication, finance, commercial real estate and construction, scientific education and intellectuals, political parties and government workers, and the consumers in general. Those are who makes the decisions. Now, but the decision making occurs by a shifting of these groups, moving around and preferring slightly different things. And it's incredibly complicated. It's, you've got 11 variables, at least 11 variables moving in subtle ways. Gradual, the changes are gradual, and they exist along a continuum. They're not binary. So very complicated decision making and weighing up of priorities. The fourth area is that the there's the shift into using rationalistic and scientific methods in order to sort of do this, these allocations, and once we determine where we want our things, how to do it and how to weight it. Now, Quigley says something really interesting here. He says, with this shift into rationalistic and scientific methods, let me find it. I've got the page number here, and I'm going to read it because this is a weird thing that he says. The working out of these shifts of resources to achieve the more concrete goals of the diverse interest blocks in the society will be increasingly dominated by rationalistic and scientific methods, emphasizing analytic and quantitative techniques. This means that emotional and intuitive forces will play, as always, a considerable role in the shifting of interest blocks which dominate the allotment of resources among the 3 sectors, but that rational rather than emotional methods on quantitative rather than qualitative bases will dominate the utilization of such resources within each sector for more specific objectives. This will require considerable freedom of discussion in such utilization, even where, as in communist states or in undeveloped areas, authoritarian and secretive methods are used in reference to the allotment among sectors. And this is the thing that got me. And, in general, there will be a very considerable modification of the areas and objectives of freedom in all societies of the world, with gradual reduction of numerous personal freedoms of the past, accompanied by the gradual increase of other fundamental freedoms, especially intellectual, which will provide the technical innovations, the clash of ideas, and the release of personal energy necessary for the success or even the survival of modern state systems. Now, if I could get Quigley in a room, I would ask him what the hell he means by more fundamental freedoms. And that the fundamental freedom that he talks about like intellectual freedom, is somehow different from personal freedoms. And that paragraph scares the life out of me more than just about any other in this book. And here's a champion of the system. He's a champion of the West. He loves the West. He thinks the West is a great thing. But also, hey, strap yourselves in because we're going to have to give up our freedoms. Well, what is the point? At that point, if we're letting our freedoms go for the preservation of the system, that's the tail wagging the dog. The system exists in order, from our perspective as individuals. I'm not talking about at a macro scale, but from our perspective as individuals, why do I care about the West? Why do I love England? Because I believe that the rights and freedoms and privileges of the individual exist in this place, exist in the spirit of the West, of the Anglo-Saxon intellectual lineage that descends from it. Personal freedoms are preserved there in a way that they are not preserved in any other society that doesn't involve anarchy. I make a distinction between anarchy and freedom. Freedom needs some sort of order in order for it to arise out of. Anarchy is superficially resembling freedom, but has no order for it to have a meaningful existence in. And I don't know.
Well, for the progressive, freedom always seems to mean something like more female CEOs and less people raising chickens in their backyard.
Yeah.
So their idea of freedom is this kind of like the freeing up of the the voiceless, giving voice to the voiceless, basically.
And
so maybe that's
for what purpose? Yeah. I don't think he is. Because I don't think that's what he is. I think managerialism has lost its productive capacity in that it has developed an ideology of managerialism. It is no longer a method of governing a system. It now also has alongside it an ideology. Because if managerialism cared about output and production, it would not be agitating for there to be more guys with their dicks cut off running Fortune 500 companies. It would just be who's the most productive person to run that company.
Ellul might argue, though, that the point of it isn't production. Like, the point of the system isn't production. It's actually to increase kind of like the technical manual, to make it more and more run by the mechanisms, the algorithms.
Sure. Okay.
So in that sense, getting rid of Elon Musk types and Donald Trump type billionaires and pulling in Susan Wojcicki's is a way of making the system become more and more reliant on technique.
Right, but Quigley, and that's fine for Ellul. I'm not disagreeing with Ellul as Ellul, but Quigley is saying that this system of the pluralist economy is existing for the furtherance of civilization and the survival of our civilization. And the hope is that the pluralist economy can act as an instrument of expansion in which we can return to that third age of expansion. And it's one of the reasons I'm pessimistic is that the pluralist economy seems to have, aka managerialism, seems to have fundamentally failed and fallen short of that. Because if it worked, the age of expansion for the pluralist economy has been the shortest ever. And unless some amazing reformation happens, I don't think that it possesses the capabilities to grow. And it clearly says every civilization, in order to maintain its vitality, needs to be growing. Do you think the West is growing? So Ellul is right. Ellul is Quigley's talking about the system hopefully, prescriptively, right? Ellul is talking about it descriptively. For those who don't know, prescription is sort of saying what the thing ought to be, and description is saying what it is. So I can give you two definitions of something, and I can say this is a prescriptive definition, and this is a descriptive definition, and they're different things. But the dog ought to have 4 legs, have a nice shiny coat, and wag its tail. But it might be a flea-bitten amputee that's kind of miserable, or maybe pretty happy. But if you see what I'm saying there, the difference between. So I think Ellul and Quigley are kind of doing different things.
Maybe I could present one more potential, way of seeing perhaps civilization is growing, but just not in the way that we think. Jonathan Pajot has this new paper out that's about how the more idiosyncratic our society gets, the more dominant the state has to become in order to manage the public space. So when everybody agrees on what's good, what's moral, how people should behave, then the state doesn't really need to have its hands in everything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So now that we have furries over here and gays over here, and
I saw something
all these different factions.
I saw something that kind of captured this, and it was each new current thing doubles the number of factions. So you had you had Trump versus Hillary people, and then you had Trump pro-vaccine people, Trump anti-vaccine, Hillary pro-vaccine, Hillary anti-vaccine. Right, or the left anti-vaccine, and now and then you had Ukraine and Russia dividing all that again, right. And now you have Israel and Palestine, and it's really wait, where are my people? Where are the pro-Trump, anti-vaccine, indifferent about Ukraine, indifferent about Israel guys? I mean, I assume that's. I'm not indifferent about Israel. It's going
to be a hard camp to find.
I'm not. Well, it's just what? Good luck, Israel. But I don't want. I got my own problems, buddy. I hope you stomp the shit out of Hamas. Go for it. But Palestine is a much more complicated issue than it's made out to be. There's a lot of them have left. Probably the largest group that left Palestine was the Christian Palestinians. But there's still a lot of Christian Palestinians that are caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. And, I'm not in favor of Israel going in and drone striking Baptist hospitals or Orthodox churches, that sort of thing. And whether or not they have or they haven't, yeah, okay. But like the expectation.
They have.
Well, I mean, yeah. But if you want to, I mean, one of the things that we say as the civilized world is, if you want to sit at this table, you cannot. If you want to sit at the table of civilization, you cannot participate in the concept of collective punishment. And I fully sympathize with Israel, but I also can't support their collective punishment of the Palestinian people, regardless of whether or not the Palestinian people sort of de facto condone Hamas by tolerating them somehow. It still is not. I mean, this is the price of holding your head up and calling yourself civilized.
In the modern world, your take is too nuanced.
Yeah.
Just pick a side. But yeah. So in that,
I'm on Jesus' side, Jeff.
So in that sense, you could say that it doesn't look like the civilization is expanding in any way, but it is expanding in the sense of like it's because the tendrils of the technocracy are reaching into ever more, deeper aspects of people's individual lives.
Okay,
so in that sense, it's expanding.
So then, what I would say is preserving Quigley's theory in the evolution of civilizations, right? Preserving that theory, what I would say is that there are 7 stages. What is it? Emergence or convergence of 2 or more cultures, gestation in which they start to form, but it doesn't look like anything's happened. All of a sudden, they explode out onto the stage, and they're in the age of expansion. 3rd is age of expansion. 4th age, the age of conflict, and it's in the 3rd and 4th age that things are actually going well. The 5th age is the age of the universal empire, in which great works happen. But those great works are not actually about increasing the productive capacity of the civilization. They're more about soaking up labor and energy that could otherwise be used for destructive purposes internally to the civilization. Stage 6 is decay. Stage 7 is collapse. And stage 7 happens when you meet a new civilization. So if I'm going to preserve Quigley's theory, what I would say is we have Western civilization in stage 5 or 6. The universal empire is America. It's in decay, and we're waiting for collapse. And what collapse might be caused by is the emergence of a new civilization, which is the global technocratic civilization. And it could be that we might want to say that the global technocratic civilization has been in gestation and is now in its age of expansion. And in its age of expansion, it is going to overthrow the age of the Western civilization in its age of decay, age of collapse. That's how I would try to preserve Quigley's theory, using these pieces that we have. Can I give you, while you think about a response to that, if you have one, I'll just say lastly, how this pluralist economy looks will differ from place to place. It is not a universally like one size fits all. It's pragmatic. What works in Botswana will look different to what the system looks like in Bolivia. And that is the pluralist economy. And that's the episode. That's all my notes. So if there is any questions or if there's any thoughts on that last little thing I said about a technocratic civilization, now's the time.
Yeah. Another way to look at it could be that, so stage 5 was the universal empire, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the technocracy is the universal empire. In that it's very focused inwardly, like everything's turned inwards, focusing on the individual, how to micromanage the individual's lives, social credit scores, that kind of thing.
But if you think that the expansion, that there's some sort of technocratic expansion happening, I kind of want to say like it's a new civilization rather than the empire of our civilization. It could be either though. I'm open to either. But I can see both. Renegade, what do you think?
Renegade asks, would the technocratic civilization be an uncentralized one in real life and a centralized one digitally?
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, this might not make much sense to us, to millennials. Millennials can remember what it was like to get Facebook. Millennials can remember what it was like when Facebook was just for college students. When
You have to get an invite.
when my mom, you needed a university email. When my mom joined Facebook, it was over. I was like, dude, it's so over. I started getting these messages about the photos that I had up on my Facebook, and I was like, oh. But for Zoomers, I think what you've said there, Renegade, makes a lot of sense. Because I think for the Zoomer, I often think there's a type of Zoomer which is that their true person is their Instagram profile, and the meat and bones walking around is a physical avatar of the real Instagram person. Whereas for me, not that I really have an Instagram, the Instagram is my digital avatar. So for the Zoomer, it's like their body is a physical avatar, if you see what I'm saying. And I wonder if the future is not going to be like a generations are going to be like, think of their reality as their like LinkedIn profile, and their body is the thing that furthers their LinkedIn profile rather than the other way around. And again, it's a system of like the tail wagging the dog to us. But yeah, strap yourselves in. I mean, I mean, I don't want to give black pills, but I think the black pill to think about the thing. Be realistic, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Be hopefully realistic, and I think that like we're in a hard fork of the human race, and it won't be based off of one single decision that you make. If you got the vax, don't worry. I don't think that was like your make or break decision. I think it's going to be a cumulative series of decisions that were made over the next 25 years. And at the end of it, we will have two groups of humans, more or less, emerging. And we will have domesticated humans, and we will have free-range humans. That is like hopeful. But the black pilling part about that is the same thing happened to dogs and wolves, and there's a hell of a lot more dogs around than there are wolves. So wolves get hunted, right? And my concern is that in this hard fork, those people who don't conform, those people who maintain their like status as like genuine humans are going to be targeted. They already are being targeted. It's died down.
Well, in Brave New World, the free-range humans live at the mercy of the domesticated humans because they give them a place to occupy, a reserve.
And that island as well, that the two guys who get and same in 1984, right? Like he goes and in some ways like the proles are the free range humans. Like the system knows it can't control the proles. Have you read The Island by Huxley?
No.
I've been meaning to read it. I've got it on my bedside table, and it's sort of like there isn't a strong narrative to it, but it's about a guy who gets like shipwrecked on this like hermit kingdom island, and it's supposed to be Huxley's answer to how we should actually live instead of letting ourselves enter into Brave New World. And this is an interesting conversation you and I have had, and maybe we should look at some biographies of Huxley, because it might be worth talking about Huxley as an individual. Because we often go back and forth, and I think where we've landed most recently is Huxley was our guy, but an imperfect our guy.
And I think he was very black-pilled as well. If he was our guy, then he just saw the future that he describes as inevitable. Yeah.
And Huxley descended from a guy, Darwin's bulldog. Yeah. And those guys were messed up. I mean, Darwin apparently, I have heard this, I found it, and I've never been able to find it again. Like, Darwin did essentially describe, like, some sort of demonic activity in his life that he couldn't account for. So there's a lot of that those guys. Huxley's part of the British elite, and the British elite are fundamentally involved with the occult in a very difficult way to come to grips with, but it's definitely there. And I'm pretty sure I made a connection between Huxley and Aleister Crowley. I have to go back into my notes and look at my Crowley notes. So, yeah. That stuff's always going on behind all of this as well. So,
yeah, before we go down another rabbit hole, I think we should end it.
So next week...
We did make it under 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I think we're just at about 2 hours, aren't we? Or maybe just a bit over. Next week, we're back to politics. It's chapter 12. We've done 11 of 20. So we've got... we've only got 9 more chapters to go, right? Yeah. 9 chapters to go. It's the policy of appeasement. There's 2 more chapters before we get into the Second World War. Chapter 12, the policy of appeasement, and chapter 13, the disruption of Europe. The policy of it, the chapter 12 deals with trying to get Hitler to not just start grabbing things, and sort of like what happens in China with the Japanese, what the Italians do in Africa, maneuvering in Europe, that's trying to make it's called the Ring of Iron around Germany of democratic Eastern European states, and then the Spanish Civil War. And then chapter 13 is more about these like seizures that Hitler makes. He takes Austria, he takes Czechoslovakia in 2 stages, and then 1939, like the sort of edging towards war in 1939. And then it's the Second World War. And a Second World War in Quigley is not super interesting. I think there's a lot of pages there, but I think that will be a single episode, because I'm not going to talk about military history, as I didn't do it for the First World War. I'm not going to do it for this one. Rather, I'm going to talk about, for the Second World War, I'm going to talk about the emergence of production and production capabilities and technology. The British developed something called organizational research, or operational research, something like that. That's going to be a big part of it. The ability to produce is going to be a big part of it. And this inauguration of a new age with the dropping of the atomic bomb, that will be a big part of it. And at that point, that I think is 3 episodes, the next 3 episodes. And then that brings us to chapter 16. So I think we've only got 8 episodes left, really. And it could be less than that. But I'm looking at my bookmarks, my like the little colorful flags I put in the book. The last quarter of the book has as many flags as the other 3 quarters. So this is, yeah, I think if you thought today was good, and I thought today was good, I did. I think today is where we can really start to see the products of these historical things, and see them active today. I think it only builds from here. I really enjoyed today. I really thought, and I thought this chapter's, this chapter's the first one that I sit there and I go, oh wow. So anyway, shall we call that next time? Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming, guys. And not that one. There we go. Thanks for coming, and as always, remember, keep your rifle by your side.
They'll look high and they'll look low.
They'll look everywhere we go.
But when the sinners find us, we won't hide. They'll come loud and they'll come fast.
But we shoot first and we can last.
Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. So we'll take a stand, 'cause we must protect our land. Keep your rifle by your side.
They'll come day and they'll come night. They'll have our children in their sights. But if they don't have faith, their eyes are blind.
They can scream and they can shout, but they can never smoke us out. Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When we hear the voice, we know we have no other choice. Keep your rifle by your side. They'll have bombs and they'll have tanks, 'cause they've got money in their banks. But we won't fall as long as we can fight.
They'll go on to preach their hate, but they won't get past the gate.
Keep your rifle by your side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When I see your face, I know I must protect my place. I'll keep my rifle by my side. Singing, oh Lord, this earth was made for us. Singing, oh Lord, this sinful life just ain't enough. When I see your face, I know I must protect my place. I'll keep my rifle by my side. Keep my rifle by my side. Keep your rifle